they can get away with so much more stuff. In fact, as a professor, I've forbidden my students from designing something for Citroën. All you have to do is something weird and offbeat, and people will go, well, of course, it's a Citroën.
To my left is Jason White. He's a real-life car designer, a professor at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. You're also a racing enthusiast and an author. I mean, there's not much you haven't done in this world.
Time travel is still in the offing.
That's true. Well, let me know when you figure that out.
I'll let you know. Yeah. And to my right is Craig Cole, who's been an automotive journalist for 20 years. You've been working in many different places, covering many different subjects.
Oh, everywhere. I've been at Autoline,
Yeah.
Auto Guide. I did some time at Roadshow by CNET as well. And now here, of course. But anyway, with this video series, we're looking to explore some significant, or in some instances, insignificant vehicle designs to really learn the ins and outs of automotive styling. And you're a designer, you're a subject matter expert, and you've got a lot of great analysis in this world. Also, to keep things interesting, Jason here has no prior knowledge of the cars discussed in each episode, so his reactions should be genuine. So, with that said, this is the car we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to slide this right over here, but first, a little background, not so fast. I think this is one of the most innovative vehicles ever built. I think it's a beautiful car, and I'm fascinated to hear what your design analysis is. So with that, make sure you like this video and please subscribe so we can bring you more content like this video right here. But anyway, Jason, let's discuss that.
Oh my goodness, aliens have landed.
They have.
They have. It is the Citroën DS Series 3 from 1969, also known as the Goddess.
The play on words with the French name,
DS,
right?
yes. Yeah. This is an incredible car, one that has no equal, both in terms of aesthetics and in terms of technical precision. In many ways, the way that it was built and the innovations it had caused it a lot of problems over the years.
I can imagine,
this is definitely a car that provokes a lot of interesting responses. Some people will look at it and go, what in the world is this?
It looks like a spaceship.
It looks like a spaceship, absolutely.
And they debuted it, at the 1955 Paris Motor Show, and it literally must have looked like the Roswell landings when they unveiled this thing on the turntable, because it still looks like an alien spacecraft.
Yeah, one of the things about this car that I really like, it breaks one of the long-held rules of car design, at least in the modern terms, where you want to give the car some wedge, like the front of the car should be a little bit lower than the back of the car. So you don't see many cars that absolutely do the opposite, which is reverse wedge. And that's what this car is doing. The shape from front to back here, it gets smaller as it goes to the back, not just in the profile, but in the plan view, the top view as well. Most car designs would not do that because there's this feeling that, that takes direction out of it. This isn't the only car that does this. Like, there are a lot of Jaguars that you could probably call reverse wedge cars also. But this car is particularly famous for its reverse wedge. If you take it out of there, it's not a DS.
It's not a DS anymore.
So, but the other reason that it's doing this is for aerodynamic reasons. And also, you may notice it here, but this wheel is further inboard than this one. Which is interesting because you don't see that very often.
So you mean the rear track?
The rear track
is
narrower
than the front track, which is very uncommon.
It's very uncommon.
Usually they're the same, very close, but yeah.
But yeah, this is another example of how vehicles have to be treated as objects in motion. They cannot be designed as something static. I mean, that usually works with trucks and SUVs, but when you have a sedan or something that's very sleek like this, you're designing it in such a way that it looks beautiful when it's moving. The other thing that I love about this design is the way that the hood shape works into the door. There's this really elaborate surface change that happens right in here. And it's not easy to do. It's very hard to pull this off when you take a hood shape like this and take it all the way into the door, and suddenly it looks like it's actually leading into the window in a way. But they pull it off, and it looks really beautiful. There's also some nice little touches here that give the car a bit of class. This chrome bead that runs along the bottom here, that's really nice.
It's subtle, though.
It's subtle. It's a nice touch. The main thing that captivates you is the shape of the vehicle. That is what draws you in. It's not the details. It's not one feature. Well, maybe the reverse wedge is one of the main features. But overall, this is a vehicle that, it's another profile design. Now, if we look at the back of the car, there are some iconic things that Citroën did. They put all the tail lamps in this and the number plate in this section here. Then they put the turn signals up here,
Way up top.
which is a very interesting solution. But it's almost a holdover from the jet age design because it's coming off of here almost like a jet engine of some
I was going to
kind.
say, it reinforces that spaceship look to the car, almost like they're thrusters or something.
Well, the vehicle also, in relationship to the road, was interesting compared to a lot of other vehicles. This car had hydropneumatic suspension,
Yes.
which meant there were reservoirs, pneumatic reservoirs on every end of the car. If one of these failed, they all failed. It was not the
very
most
complicated system.
very complicated, but it resulted, when it was working, in a car that just was very smooth, very easy to drive, and just
Magic carpet ride, they called it.
Yeah.
Because it's supposedly one of the smoothest riding cars of all time. Very smooth, well controlled. Also height adjustable suspension.
Yes, you had the ability to raise and lower it based on what was going on, what kind of terrain you were encountering.
It's fascinating as well because you can use that adjustable suspension to actually change the tire if you get a flat. Instead of a conventional jack, they give you a little stand that you put under sort of the trim, sort of the rocker panel, and then you would adjust the suspension such that the wheels would pull themselves up, and you could change the tire without having to actually jack the car up. It's fascinating.
The one thing that's different from this DS to other ones, the earlier ones had a single sealed bulb for the headlight. In this case, you have what are called the cat eyes, and these did not make it to the United States in this form.
Yeah.
The shield that's over this, they wouldn't allow in the States. Now you can do it. It's not a problem, but back then you couldn't. So that changed it. But the overall impression of the car is reinforced with this cat eye shape, and you have these two lamps.
Yeah.
One of them steering, you can see it moving there.
So as you turn the wheel, that helps illuminate around the corners. And that's why I chose the Series 3, because the earlier models did not have those swiveling headlamps. And I think with that cat eye design, it looks a lot better too than just the standard sealed beams.
Well, when you speak of the longevity of the car, that's really the only major change in the design of the car, of the DS, from its inception to when it was replaced. That's the headlamps are the only thing that really changes, that really looks different. The rest of it is pretty much the same. But the other thing that I love about this car, I'm going to go back to the interior. Citroën were always very innovative with their interiors as well. A lot of Citroëns use a single spoke steering wheel. Now, it may look like that's going to be flimsy, but it's actually it's strong enough to hold up the wheel, and you have the added bonus of being able to see what's on this this cluster very clearly most of the time.
No additional spokes blocking your view.
Yes. You can't really see it from this view, but they had a very curious brake pedal, which was actually like kind of a bladder that was closed. It looked like a closed...
Just a little button, like a little pop.
Yeah. The funny thing about it, and I can speak for experience because I've driven a DS.
Oh, fascinating.
You have no sense of how much pressure you're actually applying, which can be a problem, getting used to it. But I can attest to driving it was an interesting experience.
I can imagine.
Very smooth, almost like you're on a cloud. When everything is working properly, the DS is a fantastic piece of machinery.
They're complicated cars.
It's complicated. Yeah.
I don't know that Citroën necessarily has a good reputation for building very high quality cars, but very innovative and in this case beautiful as well.
Well, I think they have a much better reputation now than they did back then. But that's the kind of you're skirting, disaster if you try something that's really, really super over the top and innovative.
Would you pull up the profile shot again? Because I wanted to ask you about the overhangs. They're super, super short on the DS. Is that a design challenge? Is that a deliberate choice?
Well, it's a trick that a lot of people pull with car design still to this day. I mean, if you look at the front end, we're looking at it from perspective view. Now you see the full headlamp right here looking at you. Over here it's a lot smaller. The reason why is because if we look at it from a top view, this is the center line, it's doing something like this. You know what I mean? Like the lamp is here and this other lamp is here. It doesn't do this.
Yeah,
it's
they're
not a
tapered
box.
back, the lamp.
This is a trick that car designers use all the time, still today, where they try to make the overhang look less obtrusive than it actually is. And the first way that you do that is by tapering the corners like this. If it was coming out square like this, it would not look nearly as dynamic. It would probably look very clunky.
Yeah.
And even with trucks and sport utilities, they play this trick in the top. It's one of the easiest Design 101 tricks to shorten an overhang.
And with the DS here, partially because of that sort of taper to the front end, it looks aerodynamic enough that it could almost be a modern EV. This thing looks incredibly sleek.
Yeah, from an aesthetic point of view, this car eschews a lot of convention at one time. Part of the reason why it's acceptable is because I think, and this is just my experience, French companies and French design are almost given a pass when it comes to being new and innovative and weird, quite frankly. They can get away with so much more stuff than anybody else can do. In fact, as a professor, in the past, I've forbidden my students from designing something for Citroën because my rationale is all you have to do is something weird and offbeat, and people will go, well, of course, it's a Citroën. There's no challenge in that, and it basically opens up an avenue of like, well, don't do something weird for the sake of being weird. You know, and sometimes you can be forgiven for thinking that Citroën is doing that.
Yeah.
They're like with that brake pedal, it's like, did you really need to do that?
Did
you really need that?
Yeah.
They challenge every convention that's there, and this is definitely one vehicle where they did. Seeing it on site, it's still just as disarming as it was when it was released back in the day. It's a gorgeous car, and yeah, one that, again, it's not everybody's taste.
Yeah.
But you can't fault it for not being interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there's one question I wanted to ask you about as well.
Yeah.
It's the tumble home of the body. Because the tumble home starts at the base of the car. Typically, it's something you will see where the side glass is tilted in. But it looks like the whole side of the car is going up, almost like a pyramid.
It is.
What's the story with that?
Well, from a visual weight point of view, and this is actually, there's two types of things you have to consider with weight in a car. There's perceived weight, and then there's actual weight. If you were to take the bulk of the weight of the car and put it up towards the middle, the visual weight, it would give the impression that the car is very weak or very top-heavy. That's not what you want. But you're quite right when you point out that it's tipping in all the way from the bottom. Like right here is where it starts, and once you get past this chrome bit, it's canting in the whole way up, all the way from here. So the visual weight is brought way down to the bottom of the vehicle. That is on purpose because the designers wanted it to have a very planted look. If you can get visual weight down at the bottom of a vehicle, it's going to look very planted. If it ends up being up here, like if instead of that it was doing something like this, where it came in like this and the bulk of the visual weight was right here, you'd have a totally different impression of the vehicle. It would give you a totally different feel. And you could argue that well, 6 of one, half dozen of the other, the car is built the same, but you perceive a lot through styling about whether a car is sound to drive or has the strength to withstand a lot of stuff. A lot of it is just aesthetic tricks. Most of these things we're completely unaware of, but cars, a lot of the modern ones, especially ones today, have lots of tumble home in here, and that's again to get the visual weight down towards the
that more planted stance.
Exactly. If you don't have it low like they do in the DS, you want to put it at least in the shoulder up here. And that'll give the feeling of it being very strong and substantial. So,
if you were to make any changes to this design, to either clean it up, to modernize it, what might you do?
I don't know, because...
Or would you leave it alone?
I would leave it alone. I would leave it alone, honestly, because it really does stand the test of time, both in terms of... And that's really a rarity. This is a car that, is very, very unusual. But then it didn't change over the years. Like we mentioned, the only really significant change was the cat eyes rather than just a single round lens.
They made technical changes along the
way,
of course, yes. But visually, really...
Visually, it's essentially the same the whole way through. And it's just, sometimes you can't really explain things like that. It's like, in a lot of ways, it's like you're catching lightning in a bottle, and it's like, hey, this thing is timeless. But it's rare to find a timeless vehicle that's this unusual. Those two usually don't live together. They're very diametrically opposed.
Well, as we talked about in a previous episode, the Lincoln Continental from the early 60s.
Yes.
Timeless design. I wouldn't say anything unusual about it, but just super clean and elegant.
It's never going to look ugly. Ever. Hundreds of years from now, it will never look ugly. It will always look good. So, and there's something about this car that just has a timeless quality. Another theory that I would postulate here, car designs, good car designs, and the ones that last, they can usually be defined by 3 lines.
Okay.
So we have
Walk us through.
1, 2, and then this line here, 3. I'm simplifying it when I draw it, but if you can define a car, maybe a 4th line there, but if you can define a car by 3 lines, you're already well on your way to creating something that could be in a museum one day or could be iconic. If you go beyond that many lines, you're starting to get to a point where there's not one single aesthetic trait that's like dominating everything.
You're starting to design a Toyota or a Lexus, maybe.
Probably.
With a lot going on in one vehicle.
But that is one approach to design that definitely a lot of people agree with, is if the fewer lines you have, you actually make more impact with fewer lines, and that is what defines the vehicle. So I'd say this vehicle qualifies in that score, definitely.
As a designer, is it difficult to put the pencil down and step away?
Yes. It is very difficult.
There's always the temptation to keep adding more and more?
There's always the temptation, at least from my point of view, of refining more and more and more. And if you're not careful, you can take the spontaneity and the fun right out of you can regiment it right down into the ground if you're not careful. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen at the working level, and nobody is trying to hammer the life out of the vehicle, but if you just keep refining it again and again and again, you run that risk. So sometimes you just have to cut and go with what you have. And I really think, I'm sure there was a lot of refinement that went into the DS when it first was designed, but they did not lose whatever that original idea was. It came through, it ended up on the car, and that's why it's the legend it is.
Yeah, and they made it look unique, as you mentioned earlier, and also beautiful at the same time, while being full of all these innovative features. The hydrodynamic suspension system, it was front-wheel drive. I believe the rear fenders could very easily be removed for changing a tire or for doing service work. Yeah. And a lot of just brilliant features.
The amazing thing, too, about it, as complicated as it was, it stayed for sale for a long time, many decades. I remember when I first went over to Europe as a young designer, and I noticed, particularly in the Netherlands, that there were DSs all over the place. You go there now, you don't see any of them, unfortunately. But it's a car that stands the test of time, both in terms of, as long as you keep it mechanically working, it's a car that'll hang around for a while. So,
give us a letter grade. How would you rate the Citroën DS?
I'd give it an A, but I would say that this is a very rare case. We talked about it before, but just I want to really drive this point home. This is a rare case of a strange, unusual design that also becomes timeless.
Yeah, an icon.
An icon. It is very, very rare for that to happen, and that's probably the reason why this design is so iconic. It somehow captures these elements in just the right proportions, and it still shocks and amazes when you see it in real life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said.
Thank you.
Jason White, professional car designer, thank you so much for your time and your analysis of the Citroën DS. Beyond the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, where else can people find your work?
Well, they can find my work at the International Simracing Organization, where I've designed a bunch of open source racing mods, most notably IndyCar racing. But we also have an interview series that we've done called the ISO Podcast, where we've interviewed a lot of former drivers, Mario Andretti, Derek Daly. Most recently, we interviewed Ari Leindyke, also Danny Sullivan, the spin and win driver from '85. If you go to internationalsimracing.org, that's where we typically are.
But Jason White, thank you so much, and of course, thank you all for watching out there in internet land. And we mentioned the Lincoln Continental a little bit earlier, and if you want to see Jason's analysis on this iconic design, click the link on your screen right now. As always, he has some fascinating insights. And please consider liking this video and subscribing for more great content like this. We do appreciate ya.